What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by. Today's project is this old Homelite string trimmer, and the problem is that the engine cover looks almost brand new, but unfortunately the fuel tank makes the trimmer look much worse than it really is. And thanks to the comments on the last video, I was given a lot of advice on how I can get it to look much better. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this fuel tank. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. In the last video on this trimmer, I mentioned how discolored the fuel tank was and that it'd be nice to find a way to make it look new again since they no longer make this part. I got a lot of comments on how I can do just that. The most mentioned method was of course using salon grade peroxide or developer to Retro Brite the plastic back to its original color. Now this has been done before on other channels, but I've mostly seen it done to computer plastics that have yellowed due to UV exposure from sunlight. So the plan is to take the fuel tank off the engine, remove the fuel lines, clean the tank, and then put it into a clear tub with just enough water to cover it, add the peroxide, and then leave it in the sun for hours. Now since the tub is quite large and I didn't want to waste the peroxide on just one item, I figured I'd put something else in there as well. If you've seen my older videos, you'll recognize this. This is a very rare John Deere trimmer, and although it doesn't run at the moment, it's in great cosmetic shape. It too would look a lot better if the fuel tank looked as good as the paint on the engine cover, so that means we'll do the same process as the Homelite. Now there's still some fuel in the tank from the last time I used it, so we'll need to pour it out. Now something I didn't mention in the last video is that this was given to me by a coworker years ago when I was first starting to repair small engines, and they wanted to help me get started by giving me their old Homelite. And since this trimmer came from a friend who was supporting my hobby, it has a lot of sentimental value to me. That's the reason why I'd like to see this trimmer look as good as possible. It's a reminder of a good friend and one of my biggest supporters. Now after getting the fuel tank off the engine, we need to then remove the fuel lines. Now there was some fuel residue around the fuel lines, and I think I need to replace the lines with Tygon line, but I'll do that later on. I would just leave the lines in the tank, but I don't know what the peroxide might do to them. After that, I'll then take the tank off the John Deere. I will say there's an extreme difference when it comes to the way the tanks are mounted to the engines. The Homelite only uses 3 rubber feet to hold the tank to the engine, while the John Deere uses 1 large rubber foot and 2 mounting holes. I'm not sure if I mentioned the broken gas cap in the original video on the John Deere, but I just noticed it. I won't worry about it just yet till I get the engine working. Also, be very careful when taking off these rubber tank grommets. These can sometimes harden, making them very difficult to remove. So here are both tanks, and as you can see, they're varying shades of yellow or brown. However, the areas that were covered by the engine or their supports are a much lighter color. I don't know what color these were when they were brand new, but my goal is to get the tanks looking much lighter than they are now, and hopefully get it to the same color of the areas that were protected from the sun. The first step is to clean the tanks using an orange-based cleaner, then using an old toothbrush to agitate the dirtiest areas, then rinsing off the cleaner. After that, I'll fill the tub up with some water. There are a few stubborn areas on the tank that are a dark gray color. However, I won't worry about those right now. If this process works, I can always repeat it. This is my first time retrobriting plastics, so I'm very anxious to see if this even works. If it does work, I may have to do this to every trimmer I work on, or at least anything that has an opaque plastic tank on it. I will have the tub tilted, that way more of the light doesn't have to pass through the plastic. The other reason is I can use a lot less water to cover the 2 tanks. That way I won't have to use the whole bottle of peroxide. Now once I got the tanks into the water and making sure there wasn't any air pockets in them, the tanks still wanted to float to the top, so to weight them down, I decided to put some large heavy bolts inside the tank, and that seemed to do the trick. After that, I poured the peroxide in, and I wasn't sure how much to use, but in the end, I measured out about 14 ounces of peroxide for about 1.5 gallons of water that was in the tub. Every couple of hours, I would turn the tub so it was facing the sun directly, and also I moved the fuel tanks around to make sure it was getting an even amount of sunlight all around it. In the end, the tanks were in direct sunlight for about 6 hours and about 2 hours of indirect sunlight. I will say this, after the first few hours, I wasn't seeing any real improvements, so I was getting a little worried. So the fuel tanks went into the water at 8:30 in the morning, and it's now 6:30 in the evening. And as you can already see, this doesn't look very promising. After getting the water poured out of the tanks and wiping them dry, we can get a better look at them and see if there's any improvement to them. As you can see, the color is almost unchanged from this morning. I was a little disappointed, but I can't say I wasn't too surprised. However, I still want to do the test again and maybe this time change my method so I don't get the same results. The only other thing that I could come up with was using UV lamps instead of the sun. That way, I would have a consistent amount of UV exposure and I could also treat the tanks for a longer period of time. I'm not sure why it didn't work for me, but it was then suggested to me that my concentration of peroxide may have been the issue. I was then asked to try using it undiluted and physically applied to the tanks instead. So it's the next morning, and as you can see, I reinstalled the tank after yesterday's failed attempt. That won't matter because we're going to apply the peroxide to small areas to see if using it undiluted has any effect on the color. For this test, I'll pour a small amount into a container, then use a paintbrush to apply it to the tank. One area will be uncovered while the other will be covered to reduce evaporation. The test is starting at 8:30 in the morning and will end when we either see some results or after 3 hours if we see no results. Every 15 minutes, I'll reapply the peroxide to both areas until we see results or until 11:30. I really do hope this works, but if it doesn't, I might have to consider other methods to brighten the fuel tanks or try to find new old stock tanks instead, which I'm pretty sure would be more expensive than the trimmers themselves. Now, I'm not going to film every reapplication of the peroxide, but as time goes by, I hate to say it, but I'm not seeing any real improvements to the area I'm applying it to. This is the 2-hour mark, and as you can see, it looks unchanged, so I don't have a lot of hope for the next hour. So it's now 11:30 in the morning, and that means we can now remove the plastic covering the left side of the tank and see if there's been any improvement in the last 3 hours since we started applying peroxide to the tank directly. And as you can see, there doesn't seem to be any change to the appearance of the tank at all, but to get a better look, we need to move into a shady area. But my first impressions say that peroxide simply does not work on plastic fuel tanks. Now, there was one thing that changed color through the whole test, and that was the bristles on the paintbrush I was using to apply the peroxide with. It was originally a light pink color. It's now almost completely white. So I was beginning to question if the peroxide I got was any good till I noticed my fingers. This is the hand I used to remove the plastic on the left side of the tank, and some of the peroxide got on my skin. And this is what it did to it. So I'm pretty sure that the peroxide I received was at its advertised strength. Another reason why the peroxide may not have worked is that these fuel tanks were made to handle chemicals, which plastics on computers are not. So if I want to Retro Brite fuel tanks, I'm going to have to find something a lot stronger than peroxide, and unfortunately, the answer seems to be a strong acid, which I'm not looking forward to working with. I think the best thing to do would be just to leave the tank the way it is, or find a suitable replacement if there's one still available. So my question is, should I continue trying to clean this tank back to its original color, or do you think it's just a waste of time? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions. I hope to see you in the next video.